Hey, what's up, Ron here. I'm very excited to have you on for today's lesson. Today I'm going to show you how I paint using 3 values only, which basically means a white, a mid value, and a black. Now, these are not accurate. It doesn't have to be white, black, and a mid value. There is some movement in between them, but the key point is 3 distinct values. You can distinguish them. That's the most important part. So there isn't really no way of failing if you follow the method. So this is what I like about it. It's very streamlined. So let me show you how this is done real fast in Photoshop. Okay, so here we are. We got our reference photo in front of us. It's very easy to get completely lost and completely confused with this, not knowing what should I paint, what should I leave out, how do I even get started, you know? So first off, we just turned this one black and white. We'll get something really nice going on here. Less work, just less things to focus on. So now you can start asking yourself, what's the value? You don't have to ask yourself, what's the color? Because the color options are really endless, and then the black and white options are a little narrower, okay? Now, as I said, we're gonna take this one step further, turn this into fewer values. So it's different based on the software you use, but with Photoshop, you go to image adjustments and then posterize. That's the main way of doing that. And then you get to decide how many values there are going to be. So the maximum 255, then you can decrease it. And the more you decrease it, you'll start in just a second to notice, see how it becomes simpler and simpler and simpler. Now 3 really tells a good story. I can see where the cars are, where the buildings are, what everything that's going on. You don't have to go with black or white. You can crank it up a notch, lower it down, whatever you want. The most important thing is 3 distinct values. That's the only thing that really matters, okay? So as you see, by turning the photo black and white or by reducing the number of values, we're basically creating a recipe. Draw the shapes accurately, of course, based on those shapes of values. Paint them, get the right shape, and you got a streamlined method for getting realism. Now, it is important to note that ideally you want to be able to do this just by looking at a reference photo, figure out what the main shapes are, what the values that will be effective for the message. So maybe you want to increase the contrast somewhere, maybe you want to reduce it. Ideally, you want to be able to do it intuitively, but until you get there, you have this awesome training wheels that will teach you to recognize these patterns on your own. It will help. You just follow this process a few times. So with that said, talking about processes, let's jump into the process. I'm going to show you exactly how I actually paint this subject matter. So I'm going to be using this kind of Payne's gray paint. So it's a neutral, cool color. But I want to show you how, because we're going to paint this in 3 values. Only 3 values, that's all you need. You don't need any of the variety in between them. So the 3 values we're going to do are 1 white, paper white. We're just going to leave it as it is. The second one we're going to do is this kind of a middle of the road, not too dark, not too light. The way I achieve these, by the way, is just by putting in a lot of water and paint where it's a very thin consistency. And then I slowly add more and more to it until it's kind of in the middle. Now, watercolor, again, dries a little lighter, so you may want to go a little darker than you think. And then it will dry lighter. And then for the last one, we're going to go with an almost black. So just mix something very dark. Now, these are actually smaller sections, so it's not, you don't need too much of it. This will be the main dominant value. So let's get to it. And I'm going to show you, I want to start in an interesting way. I'll actually start with the car that is the center of attention and then build my way around it. Because I find that if I focus on the thing that it interests me the most, I can kind of build everything to support that. Because for the next few moments, we're really going to hone in on that. So I'm going to start with the mix of the mid value. And remember, the paper white is just what we're going to skip, which makes the process a little easier. So what you see now, and my paint is here, it's a bit off camera, but I'm using just one. And again, it's kind of a neutral gray. The color, again, doesn't matter. What matters is the value. So let me show you, and I'm going to use this as kind of a test paper. So this is around that, maybe a little stronger, but just a bit. And we can work with that, okay? So as you can see, a lot of the car is actually in this value. So if we look at the rooftop, and by the way, the way you know even how dark or light to go is by looking at the reference photo, obviously, and you can use different means, again, like Photoshop or things to sample the color itself. I don't need that, I just observe it. One more thing I would definitely suggest is printing out the photo rather than working from a screen, because a screen can really throw you off in terms of the values. A screen can go lighter than the paper, than what you're going to do. So what I'm doing is connecting the entire shadow section of the car, which is top, back, even the roof, or I don't know what you'd call this part, but this part that faces up towards the sky, that's also a little dark. And then here's where it kind of breaks off. This entire thing is in that slightly darker value. Later on, I'll come back and add the darks, like the black darkest value. But for now, I'm just treating this as one shape. And I'm skipping a few highlights here on the tail light to get them to really pop. And besides that, I can carry this down all the way to the bottom, paint around this car, paint around this highlight a little carefully, get this, maybe leave a hint of a highlight there, and paint around this car. All the way, let's go all the way down to here because the rest is actually going to be black. And I do want to show you how this process works very well in fragments, okay? Now you're looking at this and you're thinking this looks like a weird shape. I have no idea what you did here. Well, I'm going to make things a little clearer later on. And then maybe we can time-lapse the surrounding or go a little faster there. Do you want to learn to paint in watercolor? My new Watercolor Fundamentals bundle will get you started off right. You can learn all that in the full course over at proko.com/Liron. For the left side of the car, the body of the car, all we have to do is skip those highlights that you see here. This is as easy as it gets, right? It's not necessarily easy, but it's as simple as it gets at least. And I'm just working with one brush that has a capability of going thinner, thicker. That's really all I need. Now you'll notice this is where it turns black, so I can go over the line where it turns to black, or I can paint over it like I did here. Let's keep it simple for now and just focus on this area where you do see that gray, that shape, okay? Then reach all around here, leave this as a highlight, leave this as a highlight, right? Don't touch the previous wash because it's starting to dry. If I'll move it around a bit, you'll see it in the light. See, it started to dry. And we can finish this wash somewhere around here. Let's just go around the tire, why not? Something like that, okay? Now let's get the windows. So these are all dark. There aren't really any significant highlights there. You may recognize a speck or two of that paper white, but it's not as important. And we're not even doing any fancy wet and wet technique. We're not doing any of that. We're just filling in the shapes you see, okay? We've been going for about 3 minutes, and that's as simple as it gets. And let these shapes connect. I don't care that this is still a little wet, that's fine. So I'm going to paint around the highlights on the tire itself, you see? Connect it to the ground and the shadow here. And there's a highlight there, I don't want to lose that, so I kind of lost some of it. And around that other tire here. And you see there are these kind of triangular shapes here. It's all shapes, abstract shapes, you don't need to treat them as anything but that. This shadow should actually reach down all the way to here. And look at how the shape of the car is slowly created, right? And I don't even want the car necessarily to be the story of the scene. The story is the buildings and the city. And this I think is dry enough, but you know what, let's take a break, let it dry for a few more seconds and then continue. To take that break, I can actually just work on these cars here in the background because these are super dark. I can just cover almost all of them with this dark paint. I just want to make sure that this fully dries before I come back and continue this shadow for the backside, right? So here I am using very thick paint. You see this shape here, it's just dark. Let me simplify that car for you. It's just dark. And then under that, there's a tiny bit of a highlight that I may turn into the mid value. Right now, I'll leave it paper white, but we may just come back and add that mid value. For the left side, there are a bit of these lines for where the glass is. But then we have a bit of darkness on the bottom, and then we have this area that's still lighter. And aside from that, I'm going to cover almost everything up. Don't forget that you can always bring back some of the mid values or highlights just with opaque paint. But I want to mainly simplify at this stage. I don't want to go into too many complications there in the car that's a little farther. Now for the motorcycle, even simpler, I'm just going to leave a few highlights to separate it from the car, but then I'm just going to go for it and fill in everything almost. And this will read well as long as you just follow the shapes really as well as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then we'll get this beautiful contrast here between, see, the front of the car and the dark motorcycle behind it, right? And that kind of makes sense, okay? Now I think we can work on that shape. So let me just paint over that. You see there's a bit of a darker shadow here. And then this goes up like that. Around, I'm just following the lines I drew. One thing I want you to notice is how putting these details in puts the rest of the car in the right context, the mid values. Once you add the darks, it really puts the mid values in the right context, so to speak. And then what I want to do is leave where the car's brand is a bit of a highlight there. Goes around like that and close it off here. This really simplifies the process because you see the scene for what it is, just a combination of simplified values. And it already makes sense as a car. And then we can go back to here and start adding these details in. So we have this kind of a frame that's a little darker around. And then we have this area that's a little darker and these kinds of shapes. It's all shapes. I can get away with putting a very basic indication because I like to train myself to rely on what I actually see there rather than the lines I drew. The mirror is a little darker. And then we can actually start, this is also dry enough. So it's dry, so we can start putting in some of these shadows on the side of the car. We're pretty much done with this car. So what I think I'll do now is complete some of the surroundings. And then I'll be back and continue with some more interesting details. We'll get some of the sky and the buildings here in one go. Okay, so honestly, this is where it gets super fun because you start seeing the full context. As I mentioned earlier, once you put in the mid values and the darks and everything, it really starts to come together. So I want to show you this next stage because I think it's going to be really cool. Right now, there is quite a lot of highlights here. The sky, the clouds, the walls, on the cars. I want to show you how what I'm going to do now will put everything in a different, better context, and that is putting value on the ground. Right now, the ground is super light, and it can honestly be left that way, but I think it will really give a lot more meaning to these highlights if I do darken the ground. So let me go ahead and do that now. One thing to remember, and this is a great opportunity to remind you, you have to mix a lot, more than you think, right? If this quantity looks like too much, don't worry, it's probably just the right amount, actually. So I'm going to start with that. It may be enough, actually. Now, I do want to make sure that it's not too dark, so let me add just a tad bit of water. I'd much rather err on the side of caution here. Now, a lot of people are scared that this wash will touch the previous ones and awaken them. And what I will tell you about that is, first, look at me, I'm doing it. So I'm proof that it is possible to do that without reawakening the previous wash. And I will say a lot of it has to do with the quality of your paper. If you're using good quality paper, it shouldn't happen. And don't scrub it. Just go over it once and you're done. Even if you wet the same area, it shouldn't reawaken too badly. Just don't overdo, don't start scrubbing it. If you're scared, you can use a hairdryer once you finish and get it to dry faster. But honestly, most of the time you won't have a problem. So just saying it is possible. Now, what I'm doing here, I left these, of course, because you can see that as a highlight, these stripes in the middle of the road. And that's really going to help lead the viewer into the scene. Now, look at what it does to the entire feeling here. It makes everything look much more realistic, right? And while I have this as well, we can start putting in these small details that, like I said, putting in the darks and the mid values puts everything in the right context. So as soon as I put in these, it makes the highlights mean more. Okay, so this is really important. Starts to make sense. Other than that, that wall behind does have a bit of detail, but this is a classic example of don't go too detailed if it's not an absolute must. So the closer area, I will kind of set some indications that there are bricks here. So I'll just do this kind of a thing and make it organic and uneven. And then I can start splitting it into these parts. But I'm not going to fill in everything. I'm just putting an indication, and your mind, the viewer's mind, will put in the rest of the details in, will complete them, and that's really all you need here. Now I'll show you the final piece of magic, and that is how putting in those darker details will bring out even more of a sense of three-dimensionality. We're talking about the windows here for the building, this dark section, this entire dark section due to the tree growing here, some shadows within the windows and doors, and you'll see it's going to make everything connect very, very nicely. So let's give it a few more seconds to dry, and then we'll do that. Sometimes you'll do more than 3 values, maybe 4, 5. So if you feel like you need that to discern maybe the middle values, that can be a bit confusing, like 2 middle and then dark, do that. Start mapping out those darks. Let's start with a bigger shape because my brush is loaded with paint. And then we can work on this. Now look at this, there's a beautiful pattern here. And I'm not switching to a smaller brush on purpose because I want to cover up large areas easily, but you can if you feel more comfortable. Look at these beautiful mid values showing through here. There are, of course, these windows. Let's put those in, and you see how it makes everything just look more solid and in place. You see, I'm going to run through these relatively fast without going into too many details. Now, there is a compositional aspect to it. For example, maybe I don't want to attract too much attention here, so I'll just kind of simplify it and turn it into just a few windows. Instead of all this air condition unit and stuff like that, I'll just put these in to make an easy distinction, then get maybe a line or two, and that's it for this building. I don't need much more than that. And then I can move on to this wall. So this wall has quite a lot of darkness to it. I'm going to need a lot of paint and just go for it. So this is our tree, using the side of the brush to get the pattern of leaves. And then you ask yourself, maybe, why is my shape like this? Why not like that? How do I know how to draw it? Here's the answer. This doesn't matter. We're at such an advanced stage here that we got the main idea in. Pretty much nothing you do here will mess it up completely unless you cover everything with darks. And this tree is no exception. Let's get some more paint just to darken. I'm going to wet this a bit more with my water sprayer just to help the paint move a bit and to be able to get some strength out of it and maybe manage some of the edges. Now, I do want to pull this part more close towards us, so let me add something I don't see in the reference photo, a heavy shadow under the top of that fence or wall. There's a shadow under the sign here. There's a small shadow inside the door. Look at how much these small details, again, put everything in the right context. We can do just a few details on the focal point. Shadow under the door handles, and then we have this shape goes around the division of doors. And you can, a bit of shadow here, you can do the other way around and grab one of these white gel pens, and that if you need to highlight that you lost, for example, on this logo at the back, you can just get it back like that. Maybe there's a very thin highlight like here. You see this kind of a thing. It's very thin. So these, don't be ashamed to not use watercolor. I'm not a purist at least, so do whatever works for you. Some of these highlights. And then there are all of these cast shadows. Let's add a few of these just because they look nice. I think they frame the scene nicely. And I'm actually going to bring them a little more in. Maybe just trying to not have them be super duper light. And this goes over here, spills into the scene, and kind of closes it off in terms of the bottom left corner maybe. And actually, let's make it a little stronger here, closer to us. And then let's make it a little weaker, farther from us. Absorbing back, some of the paint here. And you can even loosen up the edge of the shape, which is something we didn't do at all here, but kind of get it to blend a little more, right? So let's remove the tape, and just as a reminder, here are our values. We stayed pretty loyal to them. And I think the coolest part about this process is seeing how in real time the sense of realism develops here. In real time, you see it happening. You start with the maybe lighter wash or maybe even darker wash. And then the more details you add, the more you start to feel, okay, this really feels like something. I can sense the three-dimensionality. I can sense the depth of it. I can sense it all. And it looks good and it feels great. You have a process right now. You have a way of doing this, a way of following the values that will get you a realistic result every single time. That's the most important thing. So I hope this demo basically proves that anyone can do this if you follow the right game plan. You get the photo, you reduce the number of values or you turn it black and white, you recognize the shapes, you draw them as accurately as you can, and you match the values as accurately as you can. Bam, recipe for realism. That's what I want you to take from this one. It is training wheels, but it's great training wheels. So this isn't necessarily something you'll use and then dump. You will continue using this because it's a great research tool as well. Watercolor is an amazing media, but it can be challenging to learn how to masterfully control it. In my premium course bundle, I take you all the way from the absolute basics of watercolor painting to advanced techniques, including painting realistic landscapes and portraits. Join today and discover the true joy of watercolor painting at proko.com/Liron.